Flames licked the wooden deck as the small seaplane launched into the gray Pacific dawn. Nobuo Fujita gripped the controls, heart pounding beneath his flight suit. Below him, the carrier roared forward, carrying Japan's boldest and most dangerous mission yet. The ocean stretched endless and cold, hiding the truth of what he carried. In the cramped cockpit lay two incendiary bombs, designed not for cities but for forests. His orders were simple and stunning: ignite America's coastline and bring fear to its homeland. As the shoreline of Oregon emerged through drifting clouds, Fujita steadied his breath. He had trained for combat, not for striking civilians. Yet he followed command, guiding the aircraft in a low sweep over the pines, searching for the perfect release point. The bomb bays opened with a metallic clatter. Two small cylinders tumbled into the trees, vanishing into the vast green below. No explosions shook the air, only faint plumes rising through the forest. Fujita pulled away sharply, unsure if the mission had succeeded. Behind him, the American coast remained silent. No fighters pursued, no sirens wailed. He flew eastward, scanning the horizon for threats, haunted by the thought that the target had not been soldiers, but soil he had never seen and people he had never met. The long return flight felt heavier than the outbound. Mechanical hum filled the cockpit, but Fujita heard only the echo of his own doubts. Was loyalty measured by obedience, or by the weight one carried after fulfilling an order no heart truly wanted? When he returned to the submarine carrier, the crew greeted him with restrained pride. Japan had struck the American mainland, an achievement unmatched since the war began. Yet Fujita felt no triumph. His hands trembled as he climbed from the cockpit. Back in Japan, military leaders celebrated the mission as a psychological victory. Newspapers called him a hero who pierced America's armor. But Fujita avoided the spotlight, uneasy with praise for an act that left him questioning his own convictions. Unknown to him, the bombs caused little damage. Damp soil and early rain smothered the fires before they spread. Rangers found minor scorch marks and fragments of metal, puzzled that war had reached their quiet forest without warning or explanation. As the conflict grew bloodier, Fujita flew more missions, each demanding the same discipline and silence. Yet the memory of Oregon lingered, a faint ember in the corner of his conscience. He wondered if the Americans had suffered, or if fate had spared them. Years later, Japan lay in ruins, its cities reduced to ash. Fujita returned to a homeland unrecognizable, carrying both the loss of war and the guilt of actions he could not undo. The world he fought for had vanished, leaving only questions without answers. He built a quiet life after the surrender, working in factories and raising a family, but the Oregon mission followed him like a shadow. Every mention of the war stirred the old unease. He wondered if those distant forests still held the mark of his passage. One day, a letter arrived from America. It was from Brookings, the town nearest the bombing site. Instead of anger, it carried an invitation. They asked Fujita to visit as a gesture of healing, hoping to bridge a divide born in smoke and fear decades ago. Fujita hesitated, uncertain whether he had the right to walk among the people he had once been ordered to terrorize. Yet something in the letter stirred him. A chance, perhaps, not to rewrite history, but to face it, and to honor the peace that followed. When he arrived in Oregon, he expected resentment. Instead, he met warm smiles and cautious curiosity. Children held paper cranes, veterans shook his hand, and townspeople welcomed him not as an enemy, but as a guest who had come a long way to make amends. He visited the forest where his bombs had fallen. The trees whispered in the coastal wind, tall and unscarred. There were no craters, no blackened stumps, only quiet earth reclaiming its past. Fujita exhaled, feeling a weight lift that he had carried for years. In a small ceremony, he presented his family's treasured samurai sword to the town, offering it as a symbol of apology and trust. The gesture stunned his hosts. It was not surrender, but a profound request for reconciliation from a man seeking inner peace. The townspeople returned the sword, insisting it stay with his family. Their kindness struck him deeply. Forgiveness, he realized, was not granted because he earned it, but because they chose to let the future matter more than the past. Fujita returned to Japan transformed, carrying the memory of that visit like a lantern. The shadow that had followed him since the war began to fade. For the first time, he felt he had stepped beyond the role of pilot and into the role of a man seeking harmony. Word of his journey spread, inspiring others to reflect on the human side of conflict. Fujita continued to correspond with the people of Brookings, forging a bond stronger than the fear that once separated them. His story had become proof that even wounds of war can heal. Years passed, and Fujita returned to Brookings several times. Each visit deepened the strange bond between former attacker and former target. He read to school children, answered their questions, and spoke more about peace than about the missions he had flown. He confessed to students that he had once feared meeting Americans face to face. In his youth, he had been told they were monsters. Instead, he found kindness, curiosity, and grace. Their openness dismantled stories he had believed when the world was on fire. On one visit, he helped plant a tree near the old bombing site. As the small sapling settled into the soil, Fujita pressed his hand gently to the earth. This, he thought, was the opposite of war, not tearing land apart, but giving it something that could grow. The tree became a living marker of the past, its branches stretching toward a sky once crossed by his aircraft. Local children visited it on school trips, learning that the man who tried to burn their forest had later helped plant new life in its place. Fujita was eventually made an honorary citizen of Brookings. Standing before the town, he struggled to hold back tears as the proclamation was read. A man who had once arrived over their horizon in silence now stood openly among them as a welcomed friend. He often said he did not deserve such honor, that he was only doing what conscience demanded. Yet the people insisted that his willingness to face his own history and to seek connection instead of distance made his presence a gift to their community. Back in Japan, he kept photographs from Brookings displayed in his home, images of smiling children, city officials, and the coastal forest covered his walls. They were reminders that even a life marked by war could still end in gestures of understanding. When nightmares from the war returned, he would look at those photos, recalling the laughter of American students and the wind in the Oregon trees. The memories did not erase his guilt, but they balanced it with a sense that he had tried to make things right. Fujita later invited students from Brookings to visit Japan. They walked through his hometown, met his family, and experienced a culture that had once seemed distant and mysterious. The exchange completed a circle he had spent years trying to draw. Where there had once been bomb bays and orders, There were now shared meals, stories, and laughter. The young visitors saw that behind uniforms and flags lay ordinary lives, just as fragile and hopeful as their own. Fujita watched, quietly proud. He spoke often about responsibility, telling both American and Japanese audiences that as soldiers carry the weight of decisions made far above them. He did not excuse his actions, but he refused to hide from them, using his story as a warning and a bridge. As his health began to fail, Fujita worried less about his reputation and more about the message he would leave behind. He wanted his life to be remembered not only for the day he bombed America, but for the years he spent trying to heal that wound. When illness finally overtook him, messages of sympathy arrived from across the Pacific. Brookings residents sent letters and flowers, promising to care for the tree he had helped plant and to keep telling the story of the Japanese pilot who chose reconciliation. After his death, part of his ashes were brought to Oregon. In a quiet ceremony near the forest he once targeted, townspeople and officials gathered to lay them to rest. The air was still, the only sounds wind in the branches and soft words of thanks. Some present that day reflected on the strange symmetry of it all. A man who once came to their coast as an unseen threat now returned with their blessing. His final journey turned former enemies into guardians of his memory and partners in peace. The story of Nobuo Fujita spread far beyond the small town and the quiet grove. Documentaries, articles, and classrooms carried his name, not just as a symbol of wartime audacity, but as an example of how remorse and courage can reshape a legacy. For many, his life raised unsettling yet necessary questions. Can a single act of regret outweigh a single act of harm? Is forgiveness a gift earned or freely given? Fujita's story did not answer these outright, but it made people pause and consider. What it did show clearly was that history is not frozen. A man who once embodied fear to strangers on another shore found a way to become a guest, a friend, even a figure of respect. The path between those roles was long and difficult, but real the forest. Near Brookings still stands, green and quiet, sheltering the memories of a war that almost turned it to ash. Somewhere among the trees, a man's past and his remorse share the same soil. Nobuo Fujita's flight brought fire once, and healing ever after. His life became a reminder that even in the darkest chapters of conflict, humans are more than the worst thing they have done. The pilot who bombed America, then asked for forgiveness, proved that the courage to seek peace can echo longer than the sound of any attack.